Great American Short Stories, edited by Paul Negri. An Occurrence at Old Creek Bridge, by Ambrose Bierce, in the voice of Juliana Sierra, Andrés Felipe Herrera, and Cindy Rodriguez.
A man stood upon a railroad bridge in northern Alabama, looking down into the swift water 20 feet below. The man's hands were behind his back, the wrist bound with a cord. A rope closely encircled his neck. It was attached to a stud-crossed timber above his head, and the slack fell to the level of his knees. Some loose boards laid upon the sleeper supporting the metal. A sentinel at each end of the bridge stood with his rifle in the position known as support, formal and unnatural position enforcing an erect carriage of the body. It did not appear to be the duty of these two men to know what was occurring at the center of the bridge. They merely blocked the two ends of the foot planking that traversed it. My home, thank God, is as yet outside their lines. My wife and little ones are still beyond the invaders' farthest advance. At these thoughts, which have been here to be set down in words, were flashed into the doomed man's brain rather than evolved from it. The captain nodded to the sergeant. The sergeant stepped aside. Beyond one of the sentinels, nobody was in sight. The railroad ran straight away into a forest for 100 yards. Doubtless there was an outpost farther along. The other bank of stream was open ground. Midway of the slope between bridge and fort were the spectators, a single company of infantry in line at parade rest. A lieutenant stood at the right of the line. Excepting the group of four at the center of the bridge, not a man moved. The company faced the bridge, staring stolidly, motionless. Death is a dignitary who, when he comes announced, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him. In the code of military etiquette, silence and fixity are forms of deference. The man who was engaged in being hanged was apparently about 35 years of age. He was a civilian, if one might judge from his habit, which was that of a planter. Evidently, this was no vulgar assassin. The liberal military code makes provision for hanging many kinds of persons, and gentlemen are not excluded. The preparations being complete, the two private soldiers stepped aside, and each drew away the plank upon which he had been standing. At a signal from the former, the latter will step aside, the plank will tilt, and the condemned man go down between two ties. The arrangement condemned itself to his judgment as simple and effective. He looked a moment at his unsteadfast footing, then let his gaze wander to the swirling water of the stream racing madly beneath his feet. A piece of dancing driftwood caught his attention, and his eyes followed it down the current. How slowly it appeared to move! What a sluggish stream! He closed his eyes in order to fix his last thoughts upon his wife and children. Striking through the thought of his dear ones was a sound which he could neither ignore nor understand, a sharp, distinct metallic percussion like the stroke of a blacksmith's hammer upon the anvil. He wondered what it was, and whether immeasurable distant or near by, it seemed both. What he heard was the ticking of his watch. He unclosed his eyes and saw again the water below him. If I could free my hands, he thought, I might throw off the noose and spring into the stream. By diving I could evade the bullets, and swimming vigorously reach the bank, take to the woods, and get away home. My home, thank God, is as yet outside their lines. My wife and little ones are still beyond the invaders' farthest advance. At these thoughts, which have been here to be set down in words, were flashed into the doomed man's brain rather than evolved from it. The captain nodded to the sergeant. The sergeant stepped aside.
Clayton Farquhar was a well-to-do planter of an old and highly respected Alabama family. He was an activist of the Southern cause and would give anything to help them during war. Once he had contact with a soldier who told him that there were restrictions all over the area of the railroad. Once he finished talking with him, he realized that he had get information from a federal scout.
As Peyton Farquhar fell straight downwards to the bridge, he lost consciousness. They thought he was dead. From this stage, he was awakened by the pain of a sharp pressure upon his throat, followed by a sense of suffocation. He was conscious of nothing but a feeling of fullness, of congestion. He was conscious of motion. Then, all at once, with terrible suddenness, the light about him shot upwards with the noise of a loud splash. A frightful roaring was in his ears, and all was dark and cold. The power of thought was restored. He knew that the rope had broken and he had fallen into the stream. The noose about his neck was already suffocating him and kept the water from his lungs. To die of hanging at the bottom of the river! The idea seemed ludicrous. He opened his eyes in the darkness and saw above him the gleam of light, but how distant! He was still sinking, for the light became fainter and fainter until it was a mere glimmer. Then it began to grow, brighten, and he knew that he was rising towards the surface. To be hanged and drowned, he thought. That is not so bad. But I do not wish to be shot. No, I will not be shot. That is not fair. He was conscious of an effort, but a sharp pain of the wrist apprised him that he was trying to free his hands. What a splendid effort! What magnificent, what superhuman strength! Ah, that was a fine endeavor! Bravo! The cord fell away. His arms perched and floated upwards. His neck ached horribly. His brain was on fire. His heart gave a great leap trying to force itself out of his mouth. His whole body was racked and wrenched with an unsupportable anguish. He felt his head emerge. His eyes were blinded by the sunlight. His chest expanded convulsively, and with a supreme and growing agony his lungs engulfed a great daughter of air, which instantly he expelled in a shriek. He was now in full possession of his physical senses. Something in the awful disturbance of his organic system was so exalted and refined them that made him record things never seen before. He saw the breach, the ford, the soldiers upon the breach, the captain, the surgeon, the two privates, his executioners. They were in a silhouette against the blue sky. The shadow of a gesticulated pointed at him. The captain, who had drawn his pistol but did not fire. The others were unarmed. Suddenly he heard a sharp report of something struck the waters madly within a few inches of his head, spattering his face with the spray. He heard a second report and saw one of the sentinels with a rifle at his shoulder. "Company, attention! Shoulders armed, ready! Aim, fire!" Farquhar dived as deeply as he could, yet he heard the dull thunder of the volley, and rising again to the towers of the surface, met shining bits of metal, singularly flattened, oscillating slowly downwards. Some of them touched him on the face and hands. As he rose to the surface, gasping for breath, he saw that he had been under water a long time. The soldiers had almost finished reloading. The metal brambles flashed all at once in the sunshine. The hunted man saw all of this over his shoulders. He was now swimming vigorously with the current. He thought with rapidly uplifting. The officer, he reasoned, will not make that mercenary error of a second time. It is an easy dodge of a volley of a single shot. He has probably already given the command to fire at will. God help me, I cannot dodge them all. Suddenly he felt himself whirled round and round, spinning like a top. The water, the banks, the forest, the now distant bridge, ford, and man, all were commingled and blurred. He had been caught in a vortex which made him giddy and sick. In a few moments he was flung upon a gravel at the foot of the left bank of a stream, and behind a projecting point which concealed him from his enemies. He sprang to his feet, rushed up on the sloping bank, and plunged into the forest. All that day he travelled, laying his course by the running sun. The forest seemed interminable. Nowhere did he discover a break in it, not even in Woodsman's Road. By nightfall he was fatigued, footsore, famished. The thought of his wife and children urged him, and at last he found a road which led him in what he knew to be the right direction. How softly the turf had carpeted and travelled avenue! He could no longer feel the roadway beneath his feet. Doubtless, despite his suffering, he had fallen asleep while walking, for now he is another scene. He stands at the gate of his own home. He sees his wife looking fresh and cool and sweat. Ah, how beautiful she is! As he is about to clasp her, he feels a stunning blow upon the back of his neck. A blinding white light blasts all over him with a sound like a shock of a cannon. Then all this darkness and silence. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the old Greek